Hello chess family, it's me National Master Jesse James, and today we're going to be going over another game from Logical Chess. This one I really do like. This is going to be Tarrasch versus Mieses. And yeah, it's the age-old question, which one's better, the two pieces or the rook? Well, in this position, I can definitely tell you which one I like more. Let's go ahead and check out this game. We're going to start off with a Scandinavian. It's always fun to crush this opening. Here we go. E4, D5. E takes D5, of course. Queen takes D5, the main line. And here there's two main moves for black. Black can either play the Queen D6 variation or the Queen E5 variation. Queen E5 seems to be very popular back in the day. These days, at least as modern times, I'm seeing a lot of Queen D6. Knight C3 gets played, of course, to attack the Queen, and this is where the choice needs to be made for that. And Queen E5 gets played. I sometimes play a gambit line of Pawn B4. I won't say it's the best, but I will say it is fun to play, especially against a Scandinavian player. Even if you're playing online, you might even get a free queen every once in a while. So, Pawn D4, we're still in the main line. Pawn to E5. This move's a little too robust, in my opinion. You know, when I play this line myself as black, I think that the lines of like Knight C6, waiting to see if you can get that bishop pin is probably going to be best. E5 is going to make the game equal as far as the pawn structure is concerned, but because the queen's out too early, we might be able to take advantage of that. And one of White's main idea is to play pawn to D5, try and open up position. E5 is just going to let that happen pretty fast if White chooses to. So E5, Knight F3, a nice move here. Taking back will only further develop White's pieces. Bishop B4. Yeah, again, I'm not too impressed with Black's play so far, which is probably why you know, Tarrasch just destroys Mieses in this game. Bishop D2, nice and simple. Just defending with a threat. Bishop G4, Bishop B2. Yeah, maybe White's game was maybe not the most accurate either, but White is still holding a significant advantage at +1. E takes on D4, Knight takes on D4, and Queen to E5. Well, how would you handle this situation? Here we see a very annoying pin. Black's doing a very good job by trying to put as much pressure on White as possible, but here there's many moves that White can play here to get a good game. In this game, White got played a pretty interesting move here and chooses the move Knight C to B5. There's so many moves that you can play here. One of the first ones that I'm thinking about would just be the simple castles here, as I'm just going to try and keep my development going. And with the king in the center, that's something I'd be looking at playing. A3 is another way that the computer suggests, which I'm not too sure if I like that one. Castling seems the best to me. But again, Tarrasch in this game goes ahead and plays Knight C to B5. Some trades go through. Takes. And here, Black probably should... Well, I guess he's pretty much forced straight queens here. And this is exactly what White wants. For those of you who think your king is bad in the center, this is true. Fortunately for Tarrasch here, which probably was planned ahead, this is an endgame. So, yeah, okay. Queen takes, king takes. Knight to A6, stopping the C7 check, of course. And here, again, just simple chess. Rook HE1, the king's going to run backwards and get ready to get the other rook into the game. Castle's queenside, knight takes A7 check. King to B8, and now we get a very interesting idea here. Well, you pretty much have to go for this idea now. White to move. What should we play here? This goes into one of the main ideas while we're going over this game. Well, if you play the standard move of maybe knight back here, unfortunately you're going to be losing a piece after pawn to c6, and now you see if the knight moves, the rook will take the knight. Although White still holds an advantage here as far as the computer is concerned with just rook ad1, White has so many pawns over here. Of course, we would not want to play like this. Here, the main idea and the best way to play is going to be knight to c6 check here. How beautiful is that? Pawn takes, so we got another pawn, and also we're going to be grabbing the exchange. King over, knight takes, and king takes. In this position, hopefully you can see the rooks are going to be better than the extra two pieces. Why is that so? Well, let's take an assessment of the position. First of all, we've got some pawns here, which are some extra pawns over here for White. And one of the most important things we notice is that these are, well, this one is a pass pawn, and this one's a candidate pass pawn. But most likely it will become a pass pawn at some point. These two pawns will trade off. And yeah, these two pass pawns are going to be very good to go. We can also notice in this position another reason why the rooks are better. Well, In this position right here, there's lots of open files. If there was lots of pawns on the board and the game was pretty much frozen in the center, or closed as they say, then these knights can jump around as much as they want to, and they'd be dominating these knights. This is not so. The other good reason for this endgame for white is, well, knights are notoriously bad at stopping pawns. So here we see how Tarrasch just keeps up his nice initiative. Rook a d1 check, nice and simple. King goes to e8. King to d3 check, exclam, in my opinion. Again, when you look at this position, you need to figure out what is your best plan. Well, if you go kingside by trying to push your pawns, that's not going to be a very good idea, as you see there's lots of defenders. But as we mentioned before, well, here we see that we have the extra pass pawn, and we'll most likely get a second pass pawn with the candidate pass pawn. This is the way to go. And the best piece to escort pawns is going to be the king. He's going to slowly run up there. In endgames, there's two main things you should be focused on, either trying to get a pawn across the board or trying to win material. In this game, he goes for the best plan, which is to try and get your pawns across the board, and that is definitely going to be on the queen side over here. Here, black played knight to e7. Not a move you typically like to play, but you have to be very careful here. Something like king d7 could get you in some major trouble right away. Here, king c4 check, and it doesn't really matter where this king goes. Let's just say he goes to c8. Now, the real bad issue you're going to have here is rook e8 check, and well, once the rook's doubled up, you're going to be losing your piece back, and you're not going to be you're just going to be in a losing position here. So here, black unfortunately cannot play the king to d7, which would be the most logical move. Again, we're trying to stop these pawns, so the king is going to be one of the defenders. But knight to e7, putting yourself into a pin. All right, here we go. King to c4, making progress with his idea. Pawn to h5, a very interesting idea here by black. What is black's idea here? Hopefully you understand it. Whenever you're in a winning position, it's always important to keep up your prophylactic ideas, understanding what your opponent's ideas are, so you can either stop them or let them happen if you think that they're bad. In this scenario, h5 has the benefit of maybe trying to get the rook into the game. As you can see, the rook is having a hard time getting into the game as the king blocks, and also maybe even trying to create some weaknesses on the queen side. Now this is not a huge problem for Tarrasch, so he goes ahead and plays rook to d3, knight to b8, and now rook d to e3. This pin right here is just murderous. These knights can't really help you out if they can't move, right? So only move, knight to c6. And now what should we do in this position? Should we try to add more pressure? What do we do? Hopefully you found the best move here. Remember, keep up with the main plan. Here, if you start to make random pawn moves, then you're negating from your plan. You're giving black more chances to get back into the game. Here, you can get with your plan and start your main plan, which is to push on the queen side and play pawn to b4 exclam. A very good move, threatening to play b5, which removes the knight so we can take on e7, but also is, again, going for this best plan, which is to push your queen side past pawns. Pawn to f6 gets played. What's this move do? Pretty simple idea. Black is trying to get out the pin with king to f7 here. Now there is some ideas here that if you do try to play pawn to b5, this also allows the knight to go to e5 check, so you don't really get to win your piece like you want to. Here we go ahead and continue with pawn to f4. Hopefully this is not a mysterious move for you. As we saw in the last variation, the knight was trying to get to e5, so let's take away that square. The idea of b5 is back. Black goes ahead and plays king to f7. There's really no good other move. And then pawn to a4 gets played. What happens if we play pawn to b5 here? Well, black actually gets into an equal game after knight to a5 check, king to b4, and now knight to d5 check. So he's able to win back the exchange. Yeah, it's amazing here. The computer's just giving this as equal. And the reason why is, well, we're going to be losing a pawn in these variations too. So after something like king takes, oh, actually, don't take this one because you might fall for the checkmate at 1. So after, let's see, I guess we're going to go play king c5. The knight takes on e3, rook takes on e3. Yeah, you definitely lost a significant amount of your advantage here. Yeah, I would say it's probably, I would still probably rather play with white here, but you know, each inaccuracy makes the position worse and worse. All right, so we can't go for this check. Instead, a nice move here, Pawn to a4. Again, keep up with your plan. Do not negate from the main idea. Rook to b8. And I like this nice and simple move, pawn to c3. Again, if you play the pawn to b5 here, you're only allowing knight a5 check, and some counterplay is going to get started. With the real idea is just to try and get your pawn to like a6 and then play b5, because then when the knight check comes, the king comes over, the knight actually will be trapped. So a nice steady move here, pawn to c3, guarding the b4 pawn, and making sure there's no rook checks or anything like that. Yeah, this is already becoming more and more clear that these passed pawns are really going to be the game. And the fact that these knights never really get to a good position, there was no good outpost for them, it's a very one-sided game here. And with perfect technique, it also helps out white. Rook to d8. And Tarrasch plays rook to d3. The question here I have for you, is it a good idea to trade rooks here, or should we just play pawn to a5 here? I will say both moves are good, but definitely the move rook to d3 is going to be a very good idea. Why? Well, we're going to be stopping any counterplay, which is, again, like maybe the rook goes to d2, tries to get behind the pawn, or maybe just attack our pawns. But because these knights are so bad here, we want to trade off the rooks because this limits black's counterplay. I'll keep talking about this because if you're going to be a strong chess player, you want to limit your opponent's counterplay as much as possible. I remember playing Master when I was very young, and I never was able to get my pieces out. I was always getting crushed positionally, and I was just always frustrated. And you know, there's a very good quote. I forget which chess master it is, but he's saying, you know, the stronger your chess player you are, the worse you make your opponent look by not letting them move around at all. And that's exactly what's going to happen in this game. It just never seems like black ever really got any good counterplay. Maybe in the opening whenever he was doing all these moves around, but as far as the end game came along, it was a very one-sided game. King back to e8. Of course, this king's going to try to run back over here, try and stop the pawn, but the game is pretty much over. Pawn to a5, king to d7, and pawn to a6. Again, we're trying to get to this position and then play b5 rather than vice versa. Knight to d5. Here come the knights. And f4 is being defended here. What should we play here? The typical move here would be pawn g3. But due to his calculation, a very simple one too, the best move was actually rook to a1. Can't they just snack attack over here? Well, knight takes f4 will now be losing because now we have the now we have the two ideas. We want to play pawn a7. At that case, the knight would have to sacrifice. And also this knight's undefended. So something like king e4 should be winning the game pretty fast. If knight takes g2, you might even look about ideas about rook over here to g1, but probably best was just to keep pushing these pawns across the board. And here white is, again, easily just winning here. So black played knight a7, trying to stop the pawn, and only now do we look about playing the simple pawn g3 move. Again, do not allow counterplay when it's not needed. Pawn c6 gets played, a very nice move. Anytime you're trying to move your pawns forward, you can just see this nice pattern here of just pushing your pawns in a phalanx and just slowly pushing them up the board. White would want to play c5, b5, b6 at some point, but of course, black is trying to make a stronghold over here on b5. And we have to make sure we do this correctly, right? You can't just push your pawns up forward or else, you know, knight takes b5. You can't just play pawn c4 or else knight takes b4. It has to be nice and systematic. So, pawn c6 gets played, trying to win this b5 square. Rook to a4. What's this move do? Very simple. We wanted to play c4. We wanted to play b5, but we couldn't play c4 without the knight taking. So we simply just control this square until then. Knight b6, rook to a5, pawn to g6, and pawn to c4 here. Again, the plan's very simple here. Push past pawns. Another nice move that could have been played here might be something like f5, because this is trying to mess up the pawn structure and just control some more squares. Black would most likely play g5 here, and yeah, this is just not needed. Again, you're kind of delaying and negating from the main idea, which is, again, push these past pawns as soon as possible. So c4 was definitely going to be the best move. Knight to c8, and what should we play here? A nice move, rook to a1. There's some variations with the king trying to come in here and put pressure on the rook. So, knight to d6 gets played. And now for the final stroke. Here we go, king to d4. The king had to get into the game to help control this b6 and also try to control this b5. knight back to c8. So you can see here, black is really down to his fortress and just trying to maintain it. That's why he's going to just be moving his pieces back and forward. Unfortunately, this allows white plenty of time to create that perfect breakthrough structure, or the perfect breakthrough setup. King goes to c5, king to c7, and now a nice idea here. Rook to e1. This pretty much stalemates black's moves and pretty much puts him in zugzwang. Notice here the knight cannot move anywhere. This knight cannot move anywhere. If this king tries to move away, of course, we'll just play what move? Let's just say black king plays like to d7 here. What do you play here? Of course, you'll just play b5 over here and again push your pawns. And again, the king will have to run back, but you're just slowly pushing forward here. And the rook will be able to penetrate. Let's just say if the king goes back to c7. Now you have rook e6 ideas here. And if you win these pawns, you're not only winning the pawns, but getting access to the 7th rank. These knights are just going to be terrible. King c7. Rook to e6. Oh, I'm sorry. This is actually the main game went with knight b6. And now it's game over here. Rook e7 check. Knight to d7. White to move and win. Can you find the final idea here to win? This was black's final desperation to hold the fortress. What do you play here? Got to find the whole way through. If you just find the first move, it is not a win. Because if you won't play in a road chess game, you won't be playing. If you won't play in a road chess game, then what's that mean, right? Here, the final stroke goes with rook takes, king takes. And do you play king b6 or pawn b5? One of these wins, the other one brings the game to a draw. Oof. If you played king b6, unfortunately, knight c8 check. And here you can't keep running forward because this knight is just so annoying. Although it's not a forced draw yet, you're unable to make progress here. Here, hopefully, you chose the right decision and played pawn to b5. Here, after rook takes d7, black, after king takes d7, black just went ahead and resigned. He didn't even wait for the response of pawn to b5. So, again, if you're looking to go ahead and play or make the decision, if you think the two pieces are better than the rook, always think about the pawn structure. Remember, your pieces, if you have a knight and bishop or two knights or two bishops, you're going to need some outposts for them to stay at. If you have the rooks, you're going to want to try and open up the position. So look for pawn trades so your rooks become stronger and stronger. Hope you guys enjoyed this game from Logical Chess. See you next time.